Welcome back again for today's storytelling session of part 2. We are celebrating today the World Literacy Day by Global Human Capital Society, and today in the part 2 of the session, which is for kids between 8 and 12 years of age, and we have got our distinguished guest, Claudia again.
Hi,
and
hi
Claudia is
everyone.
going to share
How's
what
everyone
is
doing?
to all of you. And what's the story name, Claudia?
Yeah, the book's called The Midnight Gang. Here it is, and it's David Walliams, who's one of my favourite children's authors. Some of you might know him. Now I'll read this off the back of the book because it's really interesting for you to see this. Or to hear this. Welcome to the Midnight Gang. Midnight is a time when most children are fast asleep, except, of course, for the Midnight Gang. This is where their adventures are just beginning. So there's the Midnight Gang. And you see most of us are asleep, except the Midnight Gang.
So take us to the story, Claudia.
Now, it's a really thick book, as you can see, so we won't have time to read it all this evening. We'll get through 1 or 2 chapters, just depending on the time. Now, also, you can ask your parents or your guardian to buy a copy of this book for you, so you can read the rest of it yourself, if you like it, and I'm sure you will. It's one of our favourite books, and I love reading it myself too. So sit back, relax. You're about to go to bed, so, take your time. You don't have to do anything. Just sit back and relax and listen to the story. And I'll show you some pictures as well, because there are pictures through this book too. It's going to take us a while to meet the characters. So it does take us a while, but I'll introduce you slowly to the characters. So welcome to the world of the was named in honour of its founder, the late Lord Funt. And this is what the hospital looks like. It's a huge building, isn't it? And it's a very old building too.
It's a very old.
It is. And this is inside the hospital. I don't know if you can see that. I'll just zoom in a bit. This is where the children's ward is, at the top of the children's ward. And then here we've got another ward called Nellie's ward. We've got Raj's ward. We have Sir Quinton Swiller's office, and we'll meet these characters soon. We've got the basement. We'll meet all these characters soon, and the gift shop.
Right.
Okay, and there's the pharmacy. But what we'll be looking at first is who's in the children's ward at the top of the building. So we're going to meet the patients in the hospital. So let's meet the patients in the children's ward high up on the 44th floor of the hospital. There's a slight interference, I think, Sandeep, with the sound. I can hear my voice coming back. That's better.
I think before you go, I'll request all viewers, please share your kid's name. If he has some answer or some questions, we would like to we'll ask Claudia those questions and she can answer them. If there's some query, they want to come in, please feel free. This is a very, very interactive session. So please go ahead and share your comments.
Definitely. So let's meet the children. First of all, we've got Tom. Tom's 12 years old and goes to a posh boarding school, and he's hurt his head. So this is why Tom's in hospital, because he's hurt his head, but he goes to a very posh boarding school. Amber's 12 as well, and she's broken both of her arms and both of her legs. So she's been in a wheelchair for some time. So here's Amber. And Robin is also 12, and he's recovering from an operation to save his eyesight. And for now, he can't see anything. And that's Robin. He's pushing Amber in the wheelchair there. But he can't see anything, so that's a bit dangerous, isn't it? George is 11 and from the East End of London, which makes him a Cockney, because people that are born in the East End of London, we call them Cockneys. He's recovering from having his tonsils out in an operation. So here's George. And he's another patient in the hospital. Sally is just 10 and the youngest of the group, but unfortunately Sally is so ill and spends most of her time asleep. And sadly, that's Sally. Okay. And as I said, it will take us a while to meet the characters, but at least you'll know who they are when we get to the actual story. Downstairs in one of the grown-up wards is the eldest patient in the hospital, and she's 99-year-old Nellie, and there's Nellie. You can see, and we saw when we looked inside the hospital, we saw Nellie's ward, didn't we? So her ward is underneath the children's ward. Hundreds of people work at Lord Funt Hospital, and among them is the porter. And he's a lonely gentleman whose real name is a mystery. They don't know his real name. He's the porter. And his job is to move people and things around the hospital, which he never seems to leave. So there he is there, the porter. You can see him with his jacket and his spiky hair and big teeth. And then we have the matron. And despite running the children's ward, she doesn't like children at all. So here's the matron, and she doesn't like the children whatsoever. And then at the bottom, we've got Dr. Lupus, and he's just become a doctor and is rather easily fooled. So I think we know that the children will probably start fooling this Dr. Lupus. Tootsie. So Tootsie is the hospital dinner lady, and she brings meals around on a trolley to all the patients. So there's Tootsie. You can see she's got her trolley and her plates there, and she brings the meals to all the patients. Nurse Mies is the tired-looking nurse who never seems to ever get a night off. And some of us will know nurses that never seem to get a night off work because they'd be busy, won't they, in the hospital. So there's Nurse Mies. She's very tired-looking, and sadly, she doesn't get any time off.
Yeah, like me.
Oh. Then we've got Dilly, and Dilly's one of the hospital cleaners. You can always tell where she has cleaned, as there'll be a long trail of fag ash left behind. So there's Tilly, look at her, and she's the cleaner. Mr. Cod is the old chemist, and he has a hearing aid and thick glasses, and Mr. Cod runs through the pharmacy in the hospital. And there's Mr. Cod. He works in the pharmacy in the hospital, and we saw the pharmacy, didn't we, when we looked inside the building. So Quinton Strillers is the upper-class hospital principal, and he's in charge of everyone and everything. So there's Quinton Strillers, and we saw his office, didn't we? From outside the hospital, there's Mr. Thews, the headmaster of Tom's school, St. Willet's boarding school for boys. So do you remember Tom? He goes to a boarding school, and this is his headmaster, Mr. Thews. And that's all the characters for the book. And this is their wards, the children's ward. So this is what it looks like inside the children's ward. And you can see the matron who doesn't like children. She's standing right there. You can just see her shadow. And the children look like they're kind of hiding from her.
She looks very tough.
Yeah, she's a tough matron.
Very strict.
So, as I said, midnight is the time when all the children are fast asleep, except, of course, for the Midnight Gang. And this is time when their adventures are just beginning. So let's start the story. So chapter 1 is called Monster Man. "Ah!" screamed the boy. The most monstrous face he has ever seen was peering down at him. It was the face of a man, but it was completely lopsided. One side was larger than it should have been, and the other was smaller. The face smiled as if to calm the boy down, only to reveal a set of broken and rotten teeth. This made the boy even more scared than before. "Ah!" he screamed again. "You'll be all right, young sir. Please try to be calm," slurred the man. And you can see the man, he's over the boy. And we met that man, didn't we? It's the porter. His face was so misshapen that so was his speech. Who was this man, and where was he taking this boy? It was only then the boy realized he was lying on his back, staring straight up, and it felt almost as if he was floating. But something was rattling. He was rattling. The boy realized he must be lying on a trolley with wonky wheels. His head clouded with questions. Where was he? How did he get there? Why couldn't he remember anything? And most importantly, who was this terrifying man monster? The trolley travelled slowly down the long corridor, and the boy could hear the sound of something being dragged along the floor. It sounded like the squeak of a shoe. He looked down, and the man was limping, just like his face. One side of his body was smaller than the other. And there's the boy on the trolley. And he looks really scared, doesn't he, there? What's happening? So then the man was dragging his withered leg along with him, and it looked like every movement might be painful. Bang! A pair of tall doors swung open, and the trolley trundled into a room and came to a stop. Then some curtains were drawn around the boy. "I hope that wasn't too uncomfortable, young sir," said the man. The boy thought it was curious that this man called him sir. He had never been called sir before in his life. He was only 12. Sir was a title reserved only for teachers at his boarding school. "Now you wait here. I'm just the porter. Let me get the nurse. Nurse!" As he lay there, the boy felt strangely disconnected from his own body. It felt limp and lifeless. The pain through was on his head. It was throbbing, hot. If the feeling could be a colour, it would be red. A bright, hot, raging red. The pain was so intense he closed his eyes. When he opened them, he realized he was staring straight up at a bright fluorescent light. This made his headache even worse than before. Then he heard the sound of footsteps approaching. The curtain was whisked back, and a larger old lady in a blue and white uniform with a hat leaned over her and examined the boy's head. Dark circles framed his bloodshot eyes. Grey, wiry hair squatted on her head, and her face was raw, as if she had scribbled it with a cheese grater. In brief, she had the appearance of someone who had not slept for a week and was angry about it. "Oh, dearie me, oh, dearie me, oh, dearie me, oh, dearie me," she muttered, to nobody in particular. In his confused state, the boy took a moment to realize this woman was in fact dressed as a nurse. At last the boy realized where he was, a hospital. He had never been in a hospital before, except the day he was born, and he couldn't remember that. The boy's eyes drifted up to the lady's name badge. Nurse Mies, Lord Funt Hospital. "That's a bump, and a big bump, a very big bump," Now, does it hurt? She said as she poked the boy hard on his head with her finger. Ah! He screamed so loudly it echoed along the corridor. And there she is, poking his head. And you can see she's got big dark circles around her eyes, can't you? She's so tired. She's been working too much.
She looks scary.
She does. Some slight pain, muttered the nurse. Now just let me get the doctor. Doctor! The curtain was whisked across and then back again, and the boy lay there staring at the ceiling. He could hear the sounds of footsteps departing. Doctor! She barked again. Now, some way down the corridor. Coming, nurse, came a voice from far away. Quickly, she shouted. Sorry, said the voice. There was the sound of footsteps approaching at speed. The curtain was whisked back, and a young, pointy-faced man breezed in, his long white coat trailing behind him. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, announced a posh voice. It was the doctor, and he was somewhat out of breath at having run down the corridor. Looking up, the boy read the man's name badge, Dr. Lupers. That's a big bump. Does it hurt? The man took out a pencil from his breast pocket and then held the end and tapped the boy's head with it. Ow! The boy screamed again. It wasn't as bad as being jabbed by a gnarly old finger, but it still hurt. Sorry, sorry, sorry. Please don't report me. I've only just graduated as a doctor, you know. I won't, muttered the boy. Are you sure? Said the doctor. Quite sure. Thank you. Now I need to make sure I'll cross the I's over the T's, and I'll just have this little admission form to fill in. The man then proceeded to roll out a form that looked as if it might take a week to complete. The boy sighed. So, young man, began the doctor in a sing-song tone that he hoped might make this boring task fun. What's your name? The boy's mind went blank. He had never forgotten his name before. Name? Asked the doctor. But try as he might, the boy couldn't remember his name. I don't know, he spluttered. And you can see the doctor here. He's got his admissions form for the boy going into hospital, and it's huge, isn't it? He has to fill out that big long form. And there's Tom. He's got a bump on his head that happened at school. Now we're closing into chapter 2, and we've still got time. A look of panic swept across the doctor's face. Oh dear, he said. There are 192 questions on this form, and we're stuck on question 1. I'm sorry, replied the boy as he lay on the hospital trolley. A tear rolled down his cheek. He felt like such a failure, not even being able to remember his own name. Oh no, you're crying, said the doctor. Please don't cry. The hospital principal could come in and he'll think I've upset you. The boy did his best to stop crying, and Dr. Lupus searched his pockets for a tissue. Unable to locate one, he dabbed the boy's eyes with the form. Oh no, now the form's wet, he exclaimed. He then began blowing on the form to try and dry it. This made the boy laugh. Oh, good, said the man. You're smiling. Now look, I'm sure we can find your name. Does it begin with A? The boy was pretty sure it didn't begin with A. I don't think so. B? The boy shook his head. C? He shook his head again. This could take some time, said Doctor under his breath. Tea! Exclaimed the boy. You would like a cup of tea? Said the doctor. No, my name begins with T. Dr. Lupus smiled as he wrote the first letter on the top of the form. Let's see if I can guess. Tim, Ted, Terry, Tony, Theo, Taj, Tina. All these suggestions firing at the boy clouded his mind, making it more difficult for him to remember. But finally his own name came shining through. "Tom," said Tom. "Tom," exclaimed the doctor, as if he was about to guess it. He wrote down the next two letters. "So what do they call you? Thomas, Tommy, Big Tom, Little Tom, Tom Thumb?" Tom replied Tom wearily. Tom had already said his name was Tom. "Do you have a surname?" "It begins with C," said the boy. "Well, at least we have the first letter. It's like doing the crossword." Chapter, Tom Chapter," said the man, scribbling it down on the form. "Right, that's question 1 done. Just 191 to go. Now, who brought you to the hospital today? Are your mummy and daddy here?" "No," said Tom. He could be sure of that. His parents weren't there. They were never there. They were always over there. For some years now, they had packed their only child off to a posh boarding school deep in the English countryside, St. Willet's Boarding School for Boys. Tom's father earned a load of money working in desert countries far away, extracting oils from the ground. And his mother was very good at spending that money. And Tom would only see them on school holidays, usually in a different country each time. Even though Tom had travelled alone for hours to see them, his father would often still have to work all day, and his mother would leave him with the nanny while she went shopping for more shoes and handbags. The boy would be lavished with presents upon arrival. He would get everything he wanted: a new train set, a model plane, a knight's suit of armour, but with nobody to play with, Tom would get bored really quickly. All he really wanted to do was spend time with Mum and Dad, but time was one thing they never gave him. "No, my mother and father are abroad," answered Tom, "and I'm not sure who brought me to the hospital today. It must have been a teacher." "Ooh," said Dr. Lupus excitedly. "Might it have been your games teacher? There was a man in the waiting area dressed as a cricket umpire, with a straw hat and a long white jacket, which I thought was unusual, and we tend not to have cricket matches in the waiting area." "Yes, that was my games teacher. That was Mr. Carsey, yes." Dr. Lupus' eyes flicked down to his form, and they flashed with panic once again. "Oh dear, it only says parent, guardian, friend, or other on the form. What am I going to do?" "Tick other," instructed the boy, taking charge. "Thank you," said the doctor, looking relieved. "Thank you so much. And what's the nature of your inquiry? A bump on the head?" "Of course, yes," replied Dr. Lupus, as he scribbled that down on the form. "Now, next question. Would you say the general appearance of Lord Funt Hospital has been lower than your expectations, has met your expectations, has exceeded your expectations, or has greatly exceeded your expectations?" "What was that first question again?" asked Tom. The pain in his head made it hard for him to think straight. "Oh, that's been lower than your expectations. What is it? The general appearance of the hospital." "I've only seen the ceiling so far," sighed the boy. "And how would you rate the general appearance of the ceiling?" "Fine." "I'll put it has met your expectations. Next question. Would you say that the care you've received today at the hospital has been poor, fine, good, very good, or in fact too good?" "It's been all right," replied Tom. Sorry, but all right isn't on the form." "Good then." "Not very good," said Dr. Lupus, a hint of pleading in his voice. "It would be nice to say I got a very good on my first week." Tom sighed. "Put too good then." "Oh, thank you," replied the doctor, his eyes dancing with delight. "No one ever gets too good. Though I worry whether too good might actually be a bad thing. Can I just put very?" "Put whatever you like." "I'll put very good. Thank you very much. This will go down very well with the hospital principal, Sir Quinton Strillers. Now, next question. We're racing through them now. Would you recommend Lord Funt Hospital to family and friends?" With a heavy heart, half-heartedly, wholeheartedly, or very wholeheartedly. Suddenly, Nurse Mees bustled through the curtains. "There isn't time for all your stupid questions, Doctor." The man put his hand up to his face as though he thought he was going to be slapped. "Don't hurt me." "You silly boy, as if I would," replied the nurse, before clouting him around the ear hard with her thick, heavy hand. "Ow!" screamed Dr. Lupus. "That hurt. Well, at least you're in the right place for an injury. Ha ha." The woman laughed to herself and almost managed to smile. "I need this station back right now. I have a newsagent being rushed here in an ambulance who managed to staple his own fingers together." "Oh, no," replied the doctor. "I can't stand the sight of blood. Get this boy out of here before I'm back." With that, the nurse Mees whipped back the curtains and stomped off down the corridor. "Okay," began Dr. Lupus. "Let me speed this up as fast as I can." The man began speaking very fast. "Bad swelling. Keep you here for a few nights, just to be safe. I hope you don't mind." Tom didn't mind staying at the hospital at all. Anything to miss any time at dreaded boarding school. It was one of the most expensive boarding schools in the country, and so most of the boys who went there were exceedingly posh. Tom's parents were rich because his father's well-paid job abroad, but the family were not posh at all. Lots of boys looked down on aristocrat noses at Tom. "I'm just going to send you up to the children's ward right away. Nice and peaceful up there. You should get a good night's sleep. Porter!" Tom froze in fear as a terrifying man limped back. "Yes, Dr. Lupus, sir," he slurred. Sorry, what was your name again?" "Tom," replied Tom. "Take Tom up to the children's ward." The porter wheeled the trolley Tom was lying on into the hospital lift. The old misshapen man hummed quietly to himself as he pressed the button for the top floor. Tom hated being alone with him. It wasn't as if he had done anything scary. He just looked really scary. The boy had never seen anyone so spectacularly ugly before. Yes, there were teachers at his posh boarding school, but they had been given cruel nicknames by the boys, but none as scary as the porter. And here are Tom's teachers, and look how scary they looked. There's some scary-looking teachers there. We've got Mrs. Rabbit, the Dome of Doom, Mr. Dead Squirrel on his head, the Hairy Gnome, Mrs. Goggle Eyes, Mr. Octopus, Mr. Clown Shoes, the Dinosaur, Miss Hooter, Professor Comb-Over. So these are all Tom's teachers and their names.
That's a very strange names.
They're nicknames that the boys have named them. So we'll just, are we running? How's our time going, Sandeep?
We are good. We've got 10 minutes.
Okay. Ping, the lift doors closed. The porter smiled at Tom, but the boy looked the other way. He couldn't bear to look at the man. He seemed even creepier than he smiled. Those rotten and misshapen teeth looked like they could crunch through your bones. Tom's eyes scanned the man's name badge. Unlike the nurse and doctor he had already met, this badge didn't have a name on it, but just as the man's job, porter. And you can see his badge there. As the lift trundled slowly upwards, Tom's world gradually began to take shape. Little by little, he began piecing together the events that had brought him to the hospital. It had been a blazing hot summer's day, and he had been playing cricket on the school pitch. The boy lifted his head slightly and looked down. He was still wearing his cricket whites. Despite his school priding itself on always coming top in cricket and rugby in the country, Tom wasn't very good at sports. The school celebrated all of its sporting heroes with cups and trophies and medals and special mention by the headmaster in assembly. A boy who much preferred to hide himself away in the corner of the school library with some dusty old books, like Tom, could easily feel like a nobody. Tom didn't like school very much and would wish the time away. If only the days and nights would pass quicker, he would often think to himself. The boy was only 12, but he longed to leave childhood behind forever. Then he'd be grown up and wouldn't have to go to school anymore. The school played cricket in the summer, and Tom immediately discovered the best part of the game for the reluctant sportsman, fielding. The boy would always place himself at the very far edge of the pitch, so far out that Tom indulged in his favourite pastime, which was daydreaming. So far out he could daydream the afternoon away, and so far there was little or no chance of the heavy red leather ball ever coming your way. Well, that was Tom's thinking anyway, and this time he was wrong, very wrong. As the numbers of the floors flashed past him in the lift, the thing Tom remembered flashed past in his mind. A red, heavy leather ball flying through the air straight towards him at the terrific speed. Thud. Everything went dark. Ping. This is your stop, young sir. Top floor. Home of Lord Funt Hospital, Children's Ward, slurred the porter. As the lift doors opened, the trolley was rolled out, and the porter pushed Tom down yet a very long corridor before a pair of tall doors banged really loudly, and you can see the bang there in the book. The pair was inside the children's ward. "Welcome to your new home," said the porter. Tom raised his swollen head with a little to take his first look at what his new home looked like, the children's ward at Lord Funt Hospital. There were 4 other children in the ward, and they were all sitting or lying on their beds. All were silent, and no one paid this boy much attention. Boredom hung in the still, stiff, stuffy air, and it was more like an old people's home than a children's ward. In the nearest bed was a plump-looking boy in an old pair of spotty pyjamas that were too small for him. He was flicking through a dog-eared picture book of helicopters and sneakily munching on some chocolates he had hidden under his bed sheets. The name George was chalked on the blackboard above his head. Next to him was a short, slight boy with neatly combed ginger hair. He must have had an operation on his eyes, as they were covered with bandages. So covered, in fact, that it would be impossible to see anything. A tall pile of classic music CDs and a CD player sat at his side table. The boy's pyjamas were much smarter than George's, and he wore them neatly with the top button done up. And here's the children in the children's ward. And you see the Midnight Gang. As you will find out when you buy this book and you read it, the Midnight Gang have adventures at night. So they all get to know each other. The children all get to know one another. They're all there for different reasons, for different injuries or illnesses. And they have a gang. And they go around the hospital at night, getting up to tricks. So over his bed in chalk was the name Robin. Across the ward from him was a girl with a bob, black hair and round glasses. Startlingly, she had both her legs and arms in plaster. All 4 of her limbs were being held aloft by a complex series of pulleys and winches. She looked like a puppet on a string. On her blackboard it read Amber. Then far in the corner of the ward, away from the other children, Tom noticed a sorrowful figure. It was a girl, but it was hard to tell her age. It was if she looked as if she had an illness that made her weak, and a few wispy strands of hair sat on top of her head. Above her bed was chalked the name Sally. "Say hello to everyone, young sir," prompted the porter. Tom felt really shy, so he muttered hello as quietly as he could get away with without being told to repeat himself. There was a vague murmur of hellos in return, though Sally remained quiet. "This must be your bed right here," slurred the porter as he wheeled the trolley over. Expertly, the boy was rolled from trolley to the bed. "Are you comfortable?" asked the porter, plumping up the pillow. Tom didn't answer. It wasn't comfortable at all. It was like lying on a concrete slab with a brick for a pillow. Even the trolley was more comfortable. It was stupid for Tom to pretend not to hear the porter, as he was standing right next to him. The man was so close that Tom could tell that he was for sure he was right there. His clothes were tired and worn, and his shoes were falling apart, and his work overall was thick with grease and grime. He looked like he might be homeless. So this was the world's worst cricketer, came a voice. The children in the ward tensed and shivered at the sound. Then a tall, thin lady stepped out of her office at the far end of the room. It was Matron, the senior nurse, who was in charge of the ward. Slowly and surely she made her way down the row of beds towards Tom, her high heels clunking on the floor. From a distance, Matron looked like she was beautiful. Her long blonde hair had been sprayed perfectly in place, and her face was shiny with makeup, and her teeth were sparkling white. However, when she got nearer to Tom, the boy realized that her smile was fake. Her eyes were two large black pools, a window into the darkness within, and Matron's perfume was so sickly sweet it burnt the children's throats as she passed by. "You're meant to catch a cricket ball, not header it," she said as she laughed. Ha ha. No one laughed except her. It certainly didn't sound funny to Tom, whose head was still throbbing with pain. "That cricket ball left a very nasty bump, Madam Matron," slurred the porter. His voice was cracking a little as if he was nervous. "I think young sir should have an X-ray." "I don't need your opinion, thank you," said Matron. In an instant her face didn't seem that beautiful after all, and it twisted into a snarl. The porter lowered his head and the other children exchanged nervous looks, and it was clear this lady intimidated them too. With a flick of her hand, Matron brushed the porter aside, and he stumbled a little to steady himself. "Let me look at this bump," she said as she peered over the boy. "Yes, you'll have to have an X-ray first thing in the morning," and the porter rolled his eyes at Tom, but Tom didn't reply. Without even so much as a glance, Matron said to the man, "Porter, you may go now." The porter sighed before giving a brief smile and nod to all the children on the ward. "Quickly," shouted the woman, and the man limped off as fast as he could. Tom began longing to be back at school. The children's ward seemed a miserable place to be, and he just wished he was back at school. And we're going to end there because we're now on chapter 5. Now, it all happens from chapter 5 onwards, where the Midnight Gang get together and they start getting up to lots and lots of mischief in the hotel, and they make really good friends. So it's a fabulous book. There's lots of other books as well by David Williams. Some of you will know them. So you can find all the different books on the inside of the front cover.
And I'm sure now all those kids who are watching, they must be having their own gangs now. So would love to hear from them. Yeah. And I'm sure they must be having a lot of doing.
Has anyone read this book?
Yes.
Just wondering if anyone's read the book already, because it's quite a popular book. It's a bestseller.
Right. So in today's session now, we're going to end here. The title story, the book title, The Midnight Gang. And we read the first chapter. And Claudia, thank you so much for reading the first chapter.
We actually read the first 4 chapters, so we got quite far ahead on it.
Yes.
Yeah, so we did quite well with it. But you must buy it and read the rest of the chapters. It really gets fun. It's really a fun book.
So, again, a big thanks to Claudia for joining us. And the first session was amazing. Second session is becoming more amazing. Yes, and thank you for joining us for this storytelling session on the eve of this, our World Literacy Day organized by Global Society of Human Capital Management. We continue bringing to you various interesting events like this, talks, leadership talks, book readings, and reviews, and many more. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you once again. We'll see you in the next session
See you
interesting
next
session.
time. Yeah, happy World Literacy Day, everyone, and keep reading.
Happy World Literacy Day to all of you.